Okay, let's unpack this. Our bodies are truly incredible, aren't they? Constantly adapting to everything we throw at them. I mean, think about the profound demands from like creating new life to pushing our physical limits or even just, navigating periods of feast and famine. Our internal systems are always adjusting, always optimizing. So today, we're diving deep into the fascinating world of metabolic adaptations.
Exactly. And for you, as a future medical student, understanding these fundamental shifts isn't just, well, theory. It's like learning the core operating manual for the human body. We'll explore how our fuel systems orchestrate these really profound changes in response to critical demands.
Mhm.
Pregnancy, intense exercise, and shifting nutritional states. Mastering these metabolic blueprints is absolutely vital for understanding health, diagnosing disease, and ultimately crafting effective treatments.
Right. So, our mission today is pretty simple. We want to make these vital metabolic shifts utterly clear and hopefully memorable for you. We'll dive into the core concepts, uncover some truly fascinating facts, and arm you with powerful metaphors and maybe a few questions so this essential knowledge really sticks for your future practice. First up, let's talk about pregnancy, which truly is a metabolic marathon for two. I mean, this isn't just about growing a baby, it's a massive metabolic overhaul, unlike almost anything else the body
Oh,
experiences.
absolutely. It's an intensely energy and nutrient demanding state. And those requirements, they progressively increase, especially in the last trimester. That's when, two-thirds of fetal growth occurs. The fetus rapidly expands from maybe 1 kilogram to around 3.6 kilograms in just those final weeks. That incredible growth explains why mothers typically gain somewhere around 11 to 16 kilograms during pregnancy. It's a huge investment.
That is a huge demand. So, okay, here's a question then. Imagine the fetus as a tiny, rapidly growing construction project. What's the main fuel source for this project, and how does the mother ensure it gets enough, even when her own body is trying to save energy? We'll circle back to that.
Good question to ponder. And what's fascinating here is the placental pipeline. Think of the placenta as the ultimate nutrient delivery service with a specialized loading dock.
Yeah.
Most substances cross by passive and facilitated diffusion, basically moving down a concentration gradient. For instance, glucose, which is the principal fuel for the fetus, is mainly transferred across the placenta by GLUT1. That's glucose transporter 1. It acts like a dedicated forklift for glucose. Now, some active transport also occurs, for amino acids, for example, but GLUT1 is really the star for glucose.
Okay, so the placenta is prioritizing fetal nutrition, but the mother's metabolism must be undergoing some radical changes to make that happen, right?
Precisely. The mother's metabolism shifts gears through what we can maybe call a two-act play. The first half of pregnancy, roughly the first 20 weeks, is Act 1, the anabolic phase. Think of this as the stocking the pantry phase. It's characterized by an increase in maternal fat stores, and this is achieved by increased insulin levels and actually heightened insulin sensitivity. So essentially building up reserves for the massive demands coming later.
Right, storing up, and then the switch happens.
Then we move into Act 2, the catabolic phase covering the second half of pregnancy. This is the opening the pantry for delivery phase. Here you actually see an increase in maternal nutrients, so glucose, free fatty acids, and ketones circulating in the blood. And this is achieved by decreasing maternal insulin sensitivity, basically increasing insulin resistance.
Wow, okay. So this phase is all about ensuring a continuous, abundant supply of nutrients for the rapidly growing fetus. That's quite a change from the initial stocking up.
Exactly. And this shift is beautifully controlled by the fetal placental unit. The placenta itself starts secreting several powerful anti-insulin hormones. Things like human chorionic gonadotropin, or HCG, corticotropin-releasing hormone, CRH, and human placental lactogen, HPL, alongside estrogen and progesterone. These hormones exert a significant anti-insulin effect. They actually impair glucose uptake in the mother's adipose and muscle tissue.
Which means the glucose stays in her bloodstream longer, available for the fetus.
That's right. It leads to this transient hyperglycemia after meals. But what's really interesting is that despite this, overall blood glucose levels are actually about 10% lower in late pregnancy. Why? Because the mother's pancreatic cells, those crucial insulin-producing cells, they undergo hyperplasia, meaning they increase in number, and hypertrophy, meaning they get larger. This dramatically increases maternal insulin levels. We're talking maybe 1.65 times higher when fasting and up to 3 times higher after a meal. However, because the fetus is continuously drawing glucose, well, hypoglycemia can sometimes occur between meals for the mother.
Okay, so that brings us back to our earlier question. Imagine the fetus as a tiny, rapidly growing construction project. What's the main fuel source, and how does the mother ensure it gets enough?
Right. So the main fuel for that fetal construction project is glucose. primarily delivered by GLUT1 across the placenta. And in that second catabolic phase, the mother's body uses this kind of hormonal tug-of-war. Those placental anti-insulin hormones create a state of insulin resistance to keep glucose and other nutrients abundant in her bloodstream. It essentially prioritizes the fetus's needs over her own tissue's glucose uptake. It's a really elegant, almost selfless metabolic strategy.
Wow, what an intricate system. But what happens when this carefully balanced system doesn't quite work as planned? This brings us to gestational diabetes, right? GDM.
Yes, GDM. This is when the pancreatic B cells just don't produce sufficient insulin to meet those increased metabolic demands of late pregnancy. Now, while rare cases are due to autoantibodies or maybe genetic susceptibility, the vast majority, really the overwhelming majority of GDM cases are due to boost cell dysfunction linked to pre-existing obesity and chronic insulin resistance. It's often kind of an unmasking event, you could say, revealing an evolving type 2 diabetes picture.
So GDM can be a critical early warning sign. How is it diagnosed then, and what are the risks involved?
Diagnosis typically involves checking fasting plasma glucose levels if they're above 5.6 millimole, or doing a 2-hour oral glucose tolerance test, the OGTT, and finding plasma glucose levels exceeding 7.8 millimole. And without proper management, GDM does carry significant complications. For the fetus, there's a risk of macrosomia.
Macrosomia.
Yeah, which we sometimes call the big baby burden. This means a large baby due to excess glucose, often with disproportionate fat around the shoulders and chest. This can potentially lead to shoulder dystocia during birth, which is a serious complication. There are also risks of hypertensive disorders of pregnancy like preeclampsia and, tragically, an increased incidence of miscarriage and congenital malformations.
Oh, wow.
But, and this is important, the good news is these risks are greatly reduced with proper diagnosis and management.
Okay, that's crucial. And who is most susceptible to developing GDM?
Key risk factors include maternal age over 25, a BMI over 25 km 2, certain racial and ethnic groups seem to have higher rates, and of course a personal or family history of diabetes or previous macrosomia. But here's the truly profound insight for you as future clinicians. GDM isn't just a temporary thing during pregnancy. It often acts as that unmasking event, revealing a pre-existing insulin resistance before the pregnancy even started. This means GDM can be a critical early warning sign. A significant number of these women, unfortunately, go on to develop type 2 diabetes later in life. Recognizing this connection is absolutely key to early intervention and preventative care.
That's a really powerful clinical takeaway. So how do we manage GDM once it's diagnosed?
Management typically starts with dietary modifications. For obese patients, this often includes caloric reduction. If persistent hyperglycemia remains, we're talking levels around 7.5 to 8 millimole after meals, or over 5.5 to 6 millimole fasting, then insulin injections might be necessary. Regular ultrasound scans are also vital to keep an eye on fetal growth and well-being.
So, GDM truly highlights how finely tuned our metabolic systems need to be, especially under the profound demands of pregnancy. It really makes you wonder how our bodies tackle other intense physical challenges, like pushing our limits in exercise. Because beyond the obvious physical gains metabolically, exercise is often called the best medicine, isn't it? Let's delve into why that is.
Absolutely. The benefits truly span multiple systems. You see improved body composition, less adipose tissue, more muscle mass. Glucose tolerance improves significantly as muscle gets better at storing glycogen, and the insulin sensitivity of tissues generally rises. Blood triglycerides decrease, so that means lower VLDL and LDL, the bad cholesterols, and higher HDL, the good kind. Blood pressure tends to fall, and there are substantial psychological benefits too. And what's crucial here, especially for you to remember, is that these benefits are particularly important for diabetics. Exercise can often reverse metabolic disease progression and, honestly, prove more successful than pharmacological intervention for type 2 diabetes in many cases.
So during exercise, our bodies are adapting rapidly. They need to meet increased energy demands, maintain homeostasis, make sure the brain gets enough glucose, and clear out metabolic waste products. It's like a symphony of systems in overdrive.
It absolutely is. Our body has this incredible energy economy with, you could say, immediate cash and long-term investments. The immediate currency is ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Think of it as the body's instant cash. But we're talking very limited stores in muscle, maybe just enough for the first 2 seconds of a 100-meter sprint. ATP is rapidly hydrolyzed by myosin ATPase that accounts for about 70% of its usage to directly drive muscle contraction.
2 seconds of instant cash isn't much. How do we get more power quickly then?
Yeah, that's where creatine phosphate, or CP, comes in. This is like the emergency fund.
Yeah.
Our muscle CP stores can rapidly replenish ATP, buying us maybe 5 more explosive seconds during that 100-meter sprint. It happens via the enzyme creatine kinase. So that initial burst, it's incredibly short-lived.
Okay, so we've got our instant cash and our emergency fund for that initial burst. It really makes you think about how differently our bodies must manage fuel for something short and explosive versus, say, an hours-long endurance race. So here's another question for you to ponder. How does your body get that immediate burst for a 100-meter sprint? And then how does it sustain energy for hours in a marathon without just hitting a wall immediately? We'll start unpacking that right now.
Excellent question. Let's explore how our fuel tanks differ for various athletic challenges. First, for the 100-meter sprint. It's just pure explosive power.
Yeah, no time for oxygen delivery there, I imagine.
Exactly. It's primarily anaerobic metabolism. ATP and CP are used first, like we said, giving you about 7 seconds total maybe. Once those high-energy stores are depleted, the muscle synthesizes ATP anaerobically using its stored muscle glycogen. But this process, well, it produces lactate and, crucially, hydrogen ions, H+.
The dreaded burn, that lactic acid feeling.
Exactly. Although it's really the H+ buildup that's the issue. That's the metabolic roadblock. It's what causes that intense fatigue and muscle cramps. And it actually impairs muscle contraction itself by inhibiting glycolysis and interfering with calcium handling. It's inefficient, and you don't get complete glucose metabolism.
Fascinating how quickly the body hits that anaerobic wall. What about a slightly longer race, maybe middle distance?
Okay, so for a 1,500-meter middle distance race, we're looking at medium duration and intensity. The body can deliver some oxygen here, so the metabolism is a mix, maybe about 40% anaerobic and 60% aerobic. The race kind of unfolds in 3 phases. The initial start still relies heavily on CP and anaerobic glycolysis from muscle glycogen. Then there's the long middle phase where ATP is produced aerobically using both glucose and fatty acid oxidation. This requires steady oxygen supply. And then for the final sprint, the muscle often has to rely again on anaerobic metabolism of whatever glycogen is left.
Right, a balance of speed and stamina,
Yep.
a metabolic mix. Now, for the ultimate endurance challenge, the marathon. Here, fuel strategy must be absolutely paramount.
It truly is. A marathon is overwhelmingly aerobic, maybe 95%. And the fuel sources shift significantly over time. In the early stages, muscle glycogen, we can call this the savings account, is the main fuel source. It can sustain energy for about 60 minutes aerobically, more or less. This is exactly why marathon runners often carb load before a race to maximize these crucial glycogen stores.
Right, filling up that savings account before the big expenditure. Makes sense.
Precisely. Then, as the race progresses into the mid to late stages, blood glucose becomes increasingly important. This blood glucose is replenished by the liver, which acts as the body's glucose bank. The liver releases glucose through breaking down its own glycogen stores, glycogenolysis, and also by making new glucose from other sources like lactate and amino acids, gluconeogenesis. Concurrently, fatty acid utilization, our long-term investment, rises steadily from about 20-30 minutes onwards. Fats provide a huge energy reserve, but the release is slower.
Okay, so if fatty acids can provide so much energy, why isn't our body relying on them even more heavily from the very beginning? What are the limitations, the trade-offs of tapping into that long-term fuel?
That's a great point. There are definitely limitations. Their release from adipose tissue is relatively slow. Their carrying capacity in the blood is limited because they have to be bound to albumin. Also, oxidizing fatty acids actually requires more oxygen per molecule of ATP generated compared to glucose. And their uptake into muscle cells and then into the mitochondria is restricted by transport systems, like the carnitine shuttle. It's just not as quick or efficient as using glucose, especially initially. So to answer your earlier question directly, for the immediate burst of a 100-meter sprint, your body uses its instant cash, ATP, an emergency fund, creatine phosphate, anaerobic. To sustain a marathon for hours, it starts with muscle glycogen savings account, then shifts to blood glucose, supplied to the liver's bank, and increasingly relies on fatty acids, that long-term investment, using aerobic energy production.
That perfectly illustrates the different metabolic strategies needed. It's amazing.
And this complex process, this fuel selection and mobilization, is orchestrated by a powerful hormonal symphony of exercise. Insulin levels actually fall slowly, primarily due to inhibition by adrenaline. You don't want insulin promoting storage when you need fuel release. Meanwhile, glucagon levels rise gradually. Glucagon stimulates glycogenolysis, breaking down glycogen in the liver gluconeogenesis, making new glucose, and lipolysis, breaking down fats. Adrenaline and growth hormone rise rapidly, further stimulating all those fuel-mobilizing processes. And cortisol rises more slowly, also chipping in with stimulating gluconeogenesis and lipolysis.
So what's the overall impact of this whole hormonal cascade during exercise?
Well, the key insight here is that the overall impact of these hormonal changes is a gradual decrease in the insulin to anti-insulin hormone ratio. Think glucagon, adrenaline, cortisol. This shift ensures that fuels are continually mobilized from various stores, liver glycogen, adipose tissue fat, and made readily available for the working muscles, maintaining energy supply throughout the exercise bout.
Okay, that makes sense. So how does our body actually get better at these amazing metabolic feats with training? How do we build stamina and become more efficient runners, for example?
That's where training adaptations come in. Consistent training leads to really significant long-term changes in both the cardiovascular and musculoskeletal systems. For instance, you get an increased number of GLUT4, that's glucose transporter 4 proteins, embedded in the muscle cell membranes. This allows for more efficient glucose uptake during and after exercise. Your muscles also increase their glycogen storage capacity. You'll literally expand that savings account. And the potential for oxidative metabolism, especially for burning fatty acids, is enhanced. You grow more mitochondria, the powerhouses of the cell, and increase levels of oxidative enzymes. Plus, you see increased muscle fiber size and number, greater vascularization, meaning more capillaries delivering oxygen and higher myoglobin content, improving the muscle's ability to store a bit of oxygen locally. It's a really comprehensive upgrade package.
Incredible. Okay, let's transition now from these intense physical demands to the body's more fundamental responses to simply what we eat or don't eat. We're talking about the basic states: feeding, fasting, and starvation. Let's start with the feast right after a meal.
Right. This is the fed state, or what you could call the abundance phase. After you eat, nutrients pour in, blood glucose levels rise, and that signals the body to respond. You get high insulin levels and low glucagon levels. Insulin is the key player here. It promotes glucose uptake by the liver, muscle, and adipose tissue. It drives the synthesis of glycogen for storage, fat synthesis, triglycerides, and protein synthesis. Essentially, the body's primarily in storage mode, tucking away energy for later use.
Got it. Abundance and storage. Now let's consider frugal, maybe when you haven't eaten for a few hours, between meals perhaps.
Okay, this is the fasting state, or the prudent phase. As time passes since the last meal and nutrient input ceases, the hormonal picture flips. Insulin levels drop, and glucagon levels rise. Now glucagon takes charge. The liver begins to release its stored glucose through glycogenolysis. It also starts making new glucose via gluconeogenesis to maintain blood sugar levels. Simultaneously, adipose tissue undergoes lipolysis, releasing fatty acids into the bloodstream. And importantly, tissues throughout the body begin to switch from using glucose as their primary fuel to using these fatty acids and eventually ketones. This is crucial to conserve glucose, specifically for the brain, which has a very high and preferential demand for it.
Right, sparing glucose for the brain. And finally, survival. What happens after an extended period without food, like true starvation?
This is the starvation state, or the survival mode. Here, the adaptations become absolutely critical for survival. The body enters this carefully orchestrated sequence to preserve vital functions as long as possible. Initially, it will deplete any remaining glycogen stores, which happens relatively quickly. Then, it shifts tissues almost entirely from glucose to using fatty acids and ketone bodies as their primary fuel source. Now, crucially, while the brain cannot use fatty acids directly for energy, it can adapt to use ketone bodies as an alternative energy source. This is a massive adaptation.
So these ketone bodies become the brain's backup fuel during this prolonged scarcity.
Exactly, that's a great way to put it. Brain's backup fuel. They're produced by the liver from the fatty acids mobilized from adipose tissue. The key goal here is to spare body protein for as long as possible. The limited glucose that the brain still requires during starvation comes primarily from gluconeogenesis. At first, the main substrate for this gluconeogenesis is glycerol, which is released alongside fatty acids during fat breakdown. Only when fat stores are severely depleted or starvation is extremely prolonged does the body begin breaking down protein, primarily from muscle tissue, to provide amino acids for gluconeogenesis. This is why prolonged starvation leads to significant muscle wasting. It's the body making a desperate trade-off, sacrificing muscle to keep the brain fueled.
This brings us neatly to our final question for you to think about. If you haven't eaten for a day, and then for several days, what fuel source does your brain switch to when glucose becomes scarce, and where does that brain fuel ultimately come from?
And the answer, building on what we just discussed, is during starvation, when glucose is scarce, your brain switches primarily to ketone bodies It's backup fuel. These ketone bodies are produced by the liver, ultimately derived from the breakdown of fatty acids mobilized from your adipose tissue, fat stores. The limited glucose still required by the brain is generated through gluconeogenesis, first using glycerol from fat breakdown, and only later, if scarcity continues, by breaking down muscle protein for amino acids. It's a remarkable testament to the body's incredible prioritized capacity for survival.
Wow. We've really journeyed through some incredible metabolic shifts today, haven't we? From pregnancy to the dynamic fuel strategies of exercise and the body's ingenious adaptations to feeding, fasting, and even starvation. What an amazing testament to the body's intricate and adaptable design.
Absolutely. And for you, our future clinicians, understanding these fundamental adaptations isn't just, academic detail. It's truly crucial. It's crucial for diagnosing metabolic conditions like diabetes or GDM, for effectively counseling patients on nutrition and exercise, and for designing treatments that actually work with the body's physiology. It's really the blueprint for human health.
So a final thought for you to consider as you move forward in your studies and career. Considering these profound and often invisible metabolic orchestrations we've discussed, where might this understanding of metabolic flexibility become a critical diagnostic or therapeutic tool in your practice that maybe you hadn't considered before?
A truly provocative question. It highlights that continuous learning journey in medicine, doesn't it? Always connecting the fundamentals back to the patient.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the adaptations of metabolism. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.